4 years ago, the sound of a closing door could send my body into a crash that would last for days. I was bedridden, and I was a prisoner in a body that reacted to everything. And I just watched my world shrink down to the four walls of my bedroom. But today I can face those same triggers without fear. And this is how I went from being totally bedridden to reclaiming my life by learning how to regulate my nervous system and making a few key mindset shifts that finally broke the crash cycle. And just to be clear, it wasn't a magic pill. It wasn't one single cure. It was a slow, deliberate process of unlearning the patterns that kept me sick and learning to communicate with my body in a completely new way. And it was all about understanding that the constant state of alarm that I was living in wasn't a life sentence. It was really a signal. It was really a signal from my nervous system that was stuck in survival mode. And the biggest breakthrough for me was realizing that I actually had the power to guide it back to safety. And if you've ever felt like your body has betrayed you, like your world is getting smaller and smaller every single day and you're starting to lose hope, I want you to know that I see you and this is for you. So to really get how I got here, and you basically have to understand where I was. And, for 4 years, my entire life was defined by my illness. I had a severe case of CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, and the hallmark symptom was dictated by my whole existence was post-exertional malaise, which is PEM. It's this feeling of being tired or a systematic collapse after the tiniest exertion. And I don't mean like running a marathon, I meant like having a conversation. It was reading one page of a book, and it was the emotional stress of hearing an unexpected noise. So my triggers were literally everywhere. Physical triggers like walking to the bathroom, cognitive triggers like just simply trying to follow a TV show, and emotional triggers like even the tiniest argument with a loved one would give me, massive reaction like a headache or extreme exhaustion. Really, my nervous system was just extremely hypersensitive, and it was really seeing everything as a threat. The sound of a door closing, it just wasn't a sound, but to my body, it felt like a lion was entering the room. And that response led to a full-blown shutdown. And the crash, would come on, and it was terrifying. At first, it was this wave of nausea, then this crushing fatigue, and then my muscles would ache and burn, and then my lip nodes would just swell, and my brain would feel like it was really, it was really difficult to concentrate, and I would lose the ability to speak properly, to think, and even tolerate lights and sounds. Really my world had shrunk down to nothing but pain, exhaustion inside my own body. I was losing hope. I watched friends and family from a distance through a screen, and their lives, moving forward while mine was stuck in this painful, fearful loop. Now, the medical system, they offered very little hope. I was told that I would just have to manage it. It was just stress, and that I have to accept my limitations. But my limitations were the four walls of my room. And it felt like a life sentence. The most ridiculous part was the fear. I became terrified of everything, maybe doing too much. Each trigger was a landmine that could steal days or weeks of my life. Fear became my primary state of being, and a constant undercurrent of anxiety that kept my nervous system on high alert, which, in a cruel feedback loop, only made the triggers worse. And I was trapped in this cycle of fear. Now, I think anyone who's lived in a chronic illness for a long time has a moment where they just hit rock bottom. Maybe, mine wasn't this dramatic event. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I realized that I just couldn't remember the last time that I even felt a moment of peace. So not just an absence of pain, but true, genuine peace. So I was living in a constant state of internal alarm, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to be, safe in my own body. And that realization sparked something. It was this tiny flicker of defiance. I just refused to believe that this was going to be my life. So I started reading and getting educated and listening to, audiobooks, and I would, focus for just these 5-minute bursts because that's all my brain could handle. And I stumbled onto the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory. And now I know it sounds complicated, but it's the core ideas of it is pretty simple. Basically, our nervous system has different states, like gears in a car, and it shifts between, these 3 different states. It's the sympathetic state, the fight or flight response. This is the gas pedal. It gets us ready to deal with danger, flooding our body with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Then there's the parasympathetic state, which, used to be just the rest and digest, but polyvagal theory splits this into 2 different pathways. There's the dorsal vagal pathway, which is, our oldest, most primitive response, And this is the emergency brake. And when we're faced with a threat that we can't handle, it slams on the brakes and sends us into this shutdown or freeze state. And this is about conserving energy, playing dead, or disconnecting from the world just to survive. And it's marked by that feeling of numbness or heaviness or just disassociation. And it was a perfect description of how I felt when I was in a crash. So I could really relate to this. This was, really, really like the aha moment. So also there's the ventral vagal pathway, and this is the safe and social state. This is a part of the nervous system that allows us to feel connected and calm and curious and present. And when we're in this state, our body can finally focus on healing and digestion and restoration. And this is the state that we feel safe. And, really, like I said, this was my aha moment. It was like someone finally handed me the user manual to my own body. And then I realized that I wasn't broken. But this is what was going on, that my nervous system was simply stuck. It was stuck in a loop of sympathetic fight or flight, just constantly scanning for threats, and then collapsing into a dorsal vagal shutdown, basically when it became just too much. So really the problem wasn't the triggers themselves. It was the interpretation of those triggers by a dysregulated nervous system. So, that sound of a door wasn't a real threat, but my nervous system was stuck on high alert, and it perceived it as one. So, yeah, this for me was the turning point. So it really just shifted everything. So the goal was no longer to avoid every single trigger on earth, because that was impossible and even miserable way to live. The new goal was to teach my nervous system that it was safe and to gently guide it out of that hypervigilant state and back into the calm, healing ventral vagal state. And this is where I started seeing results. So my recovery wasn't about, fighting my body anymore. It was about, befriending it. So really, knowing all this was one thing, but actually applying it was another. So it required a total overhaul of how I approached my illness and my life. And it really came down to two key areas, just really, radical mindset shifts and practical daily nervous system regulation techniques. And so this was the key for me. The first and the most critical mindset shift was to completely abandon the push through mentality, because this was what was causing a lot of the setbacks and flares. And for years, I tried to fight my illness, to push through my fatigue, only to, get hit with devastating crashes. So I had to learn the art of pacing. And, pacing isn't just about resting, but what it is, it's a strategic way to manage your energy. So the goal is to simply stay inside what's called your energy envelope. And this is so important. If you know your training zone, basically what you have to do is you can do only as much as you possibly can do without triggering the post-exertional malaise. So for me, that meant getting brutally honest about my limits. So I started keeping a simple activity and a symptom log. And I didn't just track what I did, but how I felt emotionally and physical, before, during, and after. And what I learned was that my energy wasn't just physical. It was also cognitive and emotional too. So even, a stressful conversation could drain me just as much as physical activity, or a physical task. So pacing meant budgeting all forms of energy. And instead of trying to get things done, my focus became stability. So if I knew I had a doctor's appointment, this was a huge energy drain for me, I would schedule absolute rest the day before and the day after. I learned to break tasks down into these tiny, manageable chunks. So instead of, clean the kitchen or, really my goal became, just wipe down the counter. And then I'd stop and check in with my body. So this really eliminated the boom and bust cycles. So pacing isn't a cure, but it stops you from constantly adding, fuel to the fire. And it creates the stable foundation where real healing can actually be built. So this is so powerful, just getting really honest about yourself, knowing where your limitations are. And really this is, the idea of pacing was just so fundamental for me. It was the very first step in stopping that crash cycle. So if you're tired of the boom and bust cycle roller coaster, then this is the foundation. But it's just one piece of the larger strategy. So, later on I'm going to explain how you can get a personalized brain rewiring and exposure plan so that you can start facing your unique triggers strategically whether that's going back to work or exercising without a crash, or even just eating at your favorite restaurants without, fear of a crash or symptoms. So stick with me. This is, especially if this is resonating, and consider subscribing so that you don't miss future deep dives into these kind of topics. So basically, yeah, this was huge. Just pacing is so important. So with that foundation and the pacing piece, I could start doing gentle, work of nervous system regulation. I began to do a lot of different tools, a lot of bottom-up techniques, using the body to send signals of safety to the brain. So the most powerful tool for this is your breath. So the vagus nerve, which is the main highway of our calming parasympathetic nervous system state, is really directly influenced by our breathing patterns. So really doing the breath work every single day was a huge turning point for me. And I didn't just start with anything like fancy, because it's really important that you just do rhythmic breathings. So just for a few minutes, several times a day, nothing, too difficult or too strenuous. So just focus on making sure that you do breathing low and slow. You can do it with, there's just a simple act that will stimulate the vagus nerve and activates the rest and digest system. So yeah, just probably everybody's going to be different, and you're going to have to find your training zone and what's going to be comfortable for you. And then when you get more capacity, you can start doing other breath techniques like the 4-7-8 breath. And that one's really good. It's where you inhale quietly through your nose for a count of 4, and you hold your breath for 7, and then you exhale audibly through your mouth and for a count of 8. So this was really one of my favorite breath work exercises, because it slows the heart rate down and it acts like a direct brake on the fight or flight response. So I'd use this before doing anything, especially if I was going to be facing my triggers. Also before you go to sleep, or, like I said, the triggers. So instead of tensing up, my new automatic habit would be to turn to my breath. And it's just really a way that you can tell your body that, that you're safe and it's time to let it go. So it's really, really powerful. I love, using that tool. There's so many tools that you could use, but, really for years, every little sensation in my body was a source of fear. A new ache, dizziness, tension, headaches, and all of it sent me spiraling into the what-if scenarios, the negative thinking patterns. And really this hypervigilance was just exhausting, and it just kept my nervous system on high alert. And the next crucial mindset for me was to move from fear to just gentle curiosity. So when a sensation came up, instead of, me labeling it as dangerous or bad, I'd practice just noticing it, and just with gentle curiosity. And this is a practice called somatic tracking. So I'd say to myself, okay, there's a tingling sensation in my left foot. That's interesting. And I wouldn't try to change it or fix it. I would just, observe it without judgment. And this whole point is just to disconnect the physical sensation from the learned fear response. So really, this was a powerful shift in my healing too. And I started to see my symptoms not as a sign that I was broken, but as information. And my body was communicating these meaningful messages with me. So a sudden wave of fatigue wasn't punishment. Now it's a signal. Maybe I've done too much, or it's time to take a little rest now. Sorry, that's my cat. I knew that was going to happen. Or if you get a headache, you could say, well, oh, that wasn't catastrophe. It's just a sign. So now it's feedback. Maybe now you need, a little more calm. So really this shift was so powerful, and it took the emotional panic out of the physical experience. And by meeting my body's signal with curiosity instead of fear, I was co-regulating with myself. And I was reinforcing the message that I'm listening, we're a team, and we're safe now. And really that was so powerful, because along with the bottom-up work, I started using top-down techniques too. So of course, it's important to use your mind to send safety signals throughout your whole body. So one of the most effective ways to do that is through visualization. So here's a cool thing. Our brain doesn't even know the difference between what's real or imagined. And so this is why visualization is so powerful. We can use this to our advantage. And, I just really created a detailed, safe place visualization. And what I do, I would just sit down and just lie down comfortably, and I would close my eyes. I would imagine a place where I felt totally, completely safe and at peace. And for me, this was, a quiet, sun-dappled forest clearing. And, I didn't just see it. I engaged all of my senses. I imagined the feeling of a warm sun on my skin, a gentle breeze in the leaves, and then, just the earthy smell of the forest floor and the feeling of a soft moss under my fingertips, and really just engaged in all of the 5 senses. And whenever I felt my anxiety rising or felt the early warning signs of a crash, I would retreat to my safe place in my mind. And I'd spend just 5 minutes there breathing, slowly and just soaking up in this imagined sensory details. So it's important to get, really into all the details. So this isn't about escaping reality, but it is about actively generating the feeling of safety in your nervous system. So by repeating this, it actually starts to carve out new neural pathways. So I was teaching my brain and body what safety actually felt like, making it more familiar and accessible place to return to. And this is just so powerful. So this is one of the most powerful mindset changes that you can do. And another one that you can do that is so powerful is, really my final and maybe most liberating mindset shift was to completely redefine what success meant. And, for my entire life, success had been about achievement, productivity, and doing more. In my illness, I applied that same logic, seeing recovery as a goal to be conquered through hard work. And really what this did is it just put more pressure on myself, and it led to more pushing and crashing. So it's really important that you just take the pressure off. You have to let that go. So I had to realize, especially on this path, that success isn't a straight line. Some days would be better than others, and success was not, it's not curing, yourself in a week. Success was choosing to do, your, breath work, or instead of panicking. Success was stopping an activity before I hit my limit. Even if it was really frustrating. Success was having compassion for myself on a bad day instead of getting angry. And over time, all of these wins add up. So I had to learn to embrace a perfectly imperfect daily routine. And it wasn't about having a flawless day where I checked off, all my healing boxes. But it was about making these small, health-focused choices, moment by moment, and little by little, this adds up. It was about choosing the response that really supported my nervous system, my biochemistry. And over time, this is how it led to my full recovery. So the journey isn't about perfection. It's about consistency and a whole lot of self-compassion. So, yeah, you may be wondering, a lot of people ask, what does life look like now? Well, it's not that I never encounter triggers. I live in the world where there's always going to be loud noises and stresses and situations. And just some days you're going to feel, not as energetic as others. And this difference is that I now, no longer have a power over me. A trigger isn't a landmine, and it doesn't cause my body to go into a flare for days. It's really just information. So yeah, I don't have to worry about, crashing for days because I know how to stay within my, my training zone. So when I encounter a trigger now, my automatic response isn't fear or tension. It's a gentle check-in. So I notice the stimuli, I take a conscious breath, and I relax, and I tell myself, oh, that was a loud sound. We're safe now. And I feel that initial jolt of adrenaline, but instead of, feeding into the fear, I let it move through me and, and dissipate. And it doesn't cascade into a full-blown crash anymore. So that's what's so important is, a lot of this is mindset shift or mindset work. So really my capacity to handle stress has widened so much. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and repetition. But now I have a full life. I'm able to travel. I'm exercise without a crash. And I can do all the things that I used to have limitations and couldn't do anything. But now I am able to work and I'm able to go hang out with my friends. And my life isn't about avoiding triggers anymore. It's about living while knowing that I have the tools to support my nervous system through whatever might come my way. So, it's important that, you can get your life back and you can live a full life, but you have the tools in case something does come your way. So I still use, visualization tools. I think they're so powerful. And, it's just really important that, you keep the tools and you just keep doing them, because they're powerful. But this journey from being bedridden to reclaiming my life it wasn't about finding a magic bullet. It was about learning my body's language and understanding that my nervous system was just really trying to protect me, even if its methods were a little bit, I don't know, destructive. So by shifting your mindset from fighting your body to, and shifting the fear to curiosity, and using these simple, consistent nervous system regulation tools, really for me, I was able to get out of that chronic fight, flight, stress response, out of survival mode. So healing is possible, and it might not look the way that you think it does, because it's often a slow, non-linear, and it requires a huge amount of patience and self-compassion. But you have more power over it than you might believe, and your body has an incredible built-in capacity for healing. So sometimes, it just needs to be reminded that it's safe enough to do so. So I want to thank you so much for being here and, listening to my story. And I really hope that it gives, at least one person hope. If you're ready to calm down that stress response and start bringing things back into life that maybe you've been forced to avoid, things like exercising or eating your favorite foods without a crash or symptoms, or maybe working full time, or just, living life without fear, then I want to invite you to join our Recovery System program. If you're tired of trying to figure this all out alone, you're ready to get real results, then let me show you exactly how it works. Our program is built on 4 key milestones to make your recovery sustainable and personalized for you. So we will create a personalized brain rewiring plan, whether it's your goal is to return back to work full-time or simply enjoy pizza again. We're going to map out your unique path to get there. Second is rewiring the limiting thought patterns that can be keeping your body stuck in fight or flight. And then third, you're going to get a 7-step brain rewiring exercise, which is a powerful tool that helps calm down your nervous system. And then the 4th milestone, which is where it gets really exciting, that's the reintroduction phase. This is where we create a personalized exposure plan to your specific needs so you can safely reintroduce foods, places, activities that may have triggered you before while keeping your nervous system calm. We have to do this strategically so you don't get a nervous system reaction. So when you join, you'll get 6 months of personalized support inside a private Facebook group where you can have access to ask unlimited questions, and you'll get exclusive tools that you can use if you do have a crash or if you do have setbacks. We can help you get out of that boom and bust cycle. So yeah, I'm really excited. I'll put a link down below. And if you're ready, just book a free brain rewiring discovery call. And on that call, we'll create a personalized plan to help you and see what's, give you a clear, actionable step so you can move forward. And yeah, I would love to help you, but the spots are limited right now because we do keep the group small to, give you personalized attention. And I'd love to walk this journey with you. So go ahead and book your free discovery call. And I look forward to seeing you. Have a blessed day.